And welcome to my YouTube channel, Lady Decoder. And today's lecture we're going to be talking about the developers tool, basically the React developer tools, and we're going to be talking about props versus state. So what is props and when to use it, and what is basically the state of the application. So before diving into the lectures, please make sure you watch the previous lectures on React.js in order to follow along. Let's just dive into the lecture. So first of all, you just have to search for React developer tools over here, and then just click the first link over here that says React developer tool, and you will get a Chrome extension like this, and you have to install it, and it will get installed on your Chrome browser over here, and you can see I have it installed already. Once the installation is done, you will get something like this. You can see that it is a red for now because it's not the prod version of the application, so that's why it's red. It's basically in the developer mode. So when I inspect this page and then I go to the you can see the components and the profile over here. I'll first go to the components, and you can see that we have this tree of components over here. So when I go to the app component, you can see we have different properties and all that. And also have, when I click the user, within the user, I don't have any properties. And then I have the state over here that basically defines that I have a user state over here, and that basically doesn't have any data. And when I click it, you can see each user have a separate component user. And within the user, I don't have any properties, but just this empty state. And you can also see that it's been rendered by users and also the app. And as much I go deep down over here, you can see I'll have different state for the component and also the properties. So through this Chrome extension or the developer tool, we can keep track of the document tree or basically the components tree, and also we can see what is basically the state of the component and what are the properties that are passed, and it will help us debug the application very well. So you can see we have these different couple of options that we'll go through in the upcoming lectures as well. But the primary thing that you can see over here is basically the props, and now you can see the state over here. So if I go to the very root component, that's basically the users component over here. So you can see props, but we don't have any defined props, but the users. So let's just go to the code and define what is basically the difference between the props and the state, and when we can use the props basically. So let's say that when the users component is rendered, then we get a list of users, and then we want to render the users list over here. But for now, let's say that, okay, I have the data, basically the user's data over here and the state, and we're not getting from the API, but just for the demonstration purpose over here, we have some users, and I want to render those users. But basically, this is a component now, but how I can pass the data for the specific user to the child component, I mean, this user component. And when I go to a definition of this component, you can see that it should be receiving some properties in order to render a single user. So where should be this user getting its data from? And the component hierarchy, you can see that we have the users component, and within the users component, we have the single user over here. So we are going to be passing. So in the users component, the very root component, we're going to be getting the users, the list of the user. And then within the users component, we will be rendering every single user, but we still have to pass some data to the user in order to render that specific user. So let's just get some users from the list over here. I'll just paste it here, and I'll just hard code it for now, just for the demonstration purpose. And when I go to the developer tools over here, when I click on the users, now you can see that the user states have now two objects over here that you can see. One object for one user, it has the address and the company email and all that, and then another user with these information. So yeah, let's just render these users basically. So in order to render this users array within the JS6, I'll have to loop through this. So basically I can simply I'll have to create the parenthesis, and within the parenthesis I'll have to access the state, basically, since the users are basically part of the state. So I can access this through this .state.users. So in here I'll just do this .state.users, and since I want to loop through this, then I'll just have to map through this, and for every single user I want to return a JSX element. So in here, basically we want to return the user itself, since this is the component that we want to render for each user. So when I save it, and without refreshing it, you can see that we now have two components over here. Single user component, this is the one, and this is the second, because we have two users over here. So now you can see two users are basically rendered, but this is not the actual data that we want to render. So how can I pass this user into this user component? So in order to do that, we simply have to make use of properties over here. So basically this user component will be receiving some properties, and we can pass this user data over here. So I'll just do something like this, user. I'll do something like this, user equal, and basically the user itself. So this user is basically this one, and this user, I can name it anything. For now, like I can just name it, for example, user data or whatever I want. So I'll just name it user data. Okay. And when I save it, you can see that, and when I click on the users, you can see that we have two users over here, and we have the users in the state. But when I click on the user itself, now you can see that we don't have any data in the state basically, but in the props we do have the user data. You can see the prop that I passed to this component. So this is the data for the first user, since I clicked the first user over here. So this is basically passed as a property to this user component. And when I click on the second user component over here, you can see that this data is basically for the second user. You can see the ID, you can see it from the ID, and the email is different, also the name is different. So this is basically the data for the second user. So this is how we can pass data from the parent component to the child component using the props. And this is what basically props are used for. But now if you go to the console, you can see an error that says each child in a list should have a unique key property. So this is the key that I was talking about basically before in the previous video. So every component that you're rendering basically will expect a key element. So this helps React to identify, for example, if we make some change to the component in the future, for example, we delete it or add some more components to the list, then the React will be able to identify and render that specific component and not the whole tree of the component. So in here we can specify a key that is basically compulsory or necessary to be passed. So either you can use the index from this array, basically the second argument of this map function is basically the index. You can pass that as well, or to be more concise or more unique, that is basically unique as well. But in some cases index creates problems, and that we can see if we pass that problem in the future, then the better way or the recommended way would be to use the ID or the unique property from this object itself. So for now I can use the ID from the user object over here. So I can simply make use of user.id over here, and I wouldn't be using any index over here like this. So when I save it and I refresh, you can see that we no longer have the error over here. And now you can see that each user component has now the key property over here that uniquely identify the component itself. So when I open this component, you can see that we have the props over here, and I will have access to this props now. So now we are passing the data as props, the user data as a prop to this user component. But how we can make use of this user data basically, and how we can actually access the properties and the user component. In order to access the props basically, we can simply do, let's say that we want to print the name for this user over here. Then we can simply, for example, instead of doing this, I'll simply do name, and I'll just do this. So in order to access the state over here, I'll need to make use of the curly braces over here, and then I'll define this dot props, something like this, just like the way we used to access the state. So this dot props dot user data basically that's the property name. This is basically the property name that we have access to, and it actually contains the user object, and each user have the name and username and everything. So for now we just need this name over here, so we can have access to that name property over here, and we can access it like this. When I save it and when I go to the component, you can see that this component has this name now, Leanne Graham, and also this is Erwin Hall. So this is how you can access the different properties from the parent component. So this is basically the way how we can use props to pass data to the component, to a child component, and also this is the way how we can have access to the data from the props actually. And if you want to see what is basically the data of the props, then we can simply make use of the lifecycle component, basically the first lifecycle component, and that we'll be dealing with a lot. That is basically called component did mount. So what this lifecycle component is, this lifecycle method is called when this component is basically mounted. So after the mount, when the component is mounted, then it triggers this function or method. So in here I can just console log the properties. So I can just say this.props, and I'll not access the user data, but I'll just show you what the props contains. And when I go to the console, you can see that we have the user data over here, and this is the data for the first user, this is the data for the second user. This has been rendered twice. We will talk about the optimization of component and all of that in the upcoming lectures, why this component is rendered twice, or the data is rendered twice. We'll be talking about that in the upcoming lectures. So I hope that you have learned something new in this video. Please like and share the video, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to press the bell icon for future updates. And until then, I'll see you in the next lecture.